basically what's happened is redistricting and the end of the partisan primaries in California have really changed the political landscape. And at the same time, and no one can miss this, the country and our community in the San Fernando Valley struggling with a very difficult series of body blows and trying to recover economically. And while many of you in the West Valley part of the district don't know me as well as, for instance, you know Brad, my hope during the course of this campaign is to make the case that if you apply the tests of responsiveness and effectiveness and having an impact on national and international issues, but just as importantly, on issues directly related to the San Fernando Valley, I'm the best choice of the candidates. That's my goal. You'll have to decide whether I get it or not. But let me just quote a little bit here. This is what the LA Times said in its editorial endorsing me. It said, Berman is one of, because we could say anything about ourselves, and we have no bounds and limits to what we say, apparently. So here's what the LA Times said. Berman is one of Congress's most highly regarded foreign policy lawmakers and is a leading voice on intellectual property issues. On the relatively few issues, they go on to say, that separate Brad and me, the Times sided with me, and here's what they said. On trade, Berman supported PACs that open foreign markets to American goods. That's smart. And as in contrast to Brad's more protectionist stance. Sherman's opposition to TARP, the LA Times said, makes for good politics, but those rescue efforts helped arrest the economy's perilous slide. Howard Berman, the Times concluded, will be more effective in the years to come at serving the voters of his district. The Republican district attorney, the organization, the LA Police Protective League, representing LA police officers, the chiefs of police of LA County have all endorsed my candidacy because of my leadership in bringing more police money from the federal government to Los Angeles and to the San Fernando Valley. And for all the personal security reasons, but also for economic interest, security is a really important issue. I think anybody in business here will affirm that. The Humane Society, a very different kind of group, they said basically that both of us have excellent records and both of us have received their awards. But they endorsed me, and I quote, on the issue of influence and leadership, there are few people in Congress like Howard Berman. Stopping the closure of the Kaiser Permanente Hospital after the Northridge earthquake, taking the key role in widening of the 405, a miserable situation right now, but hopefully by the end of next year, we will have a more sensible, better artery that takes so many people, probably the most trafficked freeway stretch in the country, a little bit easier than it is now. Creating the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy to try and preserve open space and put some limits on haphazard and reckless development. Protecting jobs in the entertainment industry. Rebuilding the Hanson Dam recreational area up in the Northeast Valley, part of my current district. It was a center of gangs and drugs until we stepped in under my leadership and turned it into a unbelievable recreation area serving the most underserved part of the San Fernando Valley. Promoting exports by Valley businesses, reforming our export laws, fighting fraud in government contracting, and on these and so many different issues, I've led and I have produced results. So, bringing this to a close, one facet of my work in Congress is I work with Republicans in Congress all the time. You see a level of polarization there, but where I've been successful is because I've been able to engage with Republican partners on issues ranging from critical foreign policy issues to things as seemingly boring, but very essential for our future economic innovation, patent reform, bipartisan, work together, both parties, both houses. This is, I think, why both U.S. senators are supporting my candidacy. The governor is supporting it. The current Democratic mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, and the former Republican mayor, Richard Reardon, are supporting me. 24 of the 26 House Democrats who have chosen to endorse in this race. All 5 county supervisors, Republicans as well as Democrats, are supporting me. And most of my elected official colleagues in the San Fernando Valley, most particularly my dear friend represents this area in the State Assembly, Bob Blumenfield, as well as the 2 congressmen who now represent parts of the San Fernando Valley, Henry Waxman and Adam Schiff. They work with me all the time, these elected officials, and they know who's more effective. So what I guess I ask you over the course of this campaign is to think about whether you would be willing to give me the honor and the opportunity to represent you. And I think I can tell you quite honestly, I won't disappoint you. Thank you very much for this.
The next candidate I'd like to introduce is Susan Shelley. Susan, come on up. Susan is the Republican candidate for Congress, and she is an author and novel of the 37th Amendment. I have to talk to you about that one. And the modern history of the Bill of Rights, titled How the First Amendment Came to Protect Topless Dancing. She graduated from Cal State Northridge, my alma mater, with a bachelor's in American history, and went on to work for the Merv Griffin Enterprise. Went from a production assistant and eventually becoming an associate producer of Jeopardy, before becoming a full-time writer. Her work has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the Daily News, and other papers around the country and on the internet. Her books have been acquired by many law libraries and university libraries around the country and are now available on eBay. Thank you. Amazon.com. Well, eBay as well. Amazon.com. Thank you. Yes.
Hello, it's very nice to be here, and thank you all for coming. I'm running for Congress because I think things are not fine in this country. If you think things are fine in this country, in this district you have 2 fine choices to continue things the way they are. I think things are not fine. And I would like to give you some ideas on how we can change some of the things that we take for granted, that we don't think can ever change, that we've all just given up on. One of them is the tax code. I want you to imagine with me for just a moment, when you think that nothing can change, that the kids will never be as well off as their parents, that you think the housing market will never recover, that we'll never know the kind of prosperity we've known in the past. Imagine with me for just a moment what would happen in this country if we threw out the entire tax code and replaced it with a 5% flat tax. If we turned ourselves into the Cayman Islands on the Pacific, what would happen to our economy? Would businesses start up? Would new businesses come from overseas? Would people be rushing here like it was the gold rush, like it was the post-war boom? If we had a 5% flat tax, would anything be different 5 years later? Let your imagination work on that, and think about how this country was built on ideas. And we are the people who believe that ideas can change the world. All around the globe, the United States is an inspiration because we understand ideas change the world. In addition to the tax idea, and by the way, I'm endorsed by the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association because I care about taxpayer rights and I'm concerned about protecting taxpayers from tax-hungry politicians who want to spend all your money. In addition to that, think about what would change if we subjected every new government regulation to an economic impact report. We're all accustomed for 30 years now to hearing about environmental impact, and that's certainly very important. But what about economic impact? Shouldn't we have a mechanism to consider that before legislation is passed, before regulations are enacted? Shouldn't we think about how many jobs it's going to cost? and what it's going to cost consumers. When we think about mandates from government, shouldn't we think about mandates not just for green energy, but mandates for affordable energy? How different would the country look if the debate over fracking, for instance, and shale oil and this sort of thing had to consider what does it do to affordability? Does it make energy less expensive for consumers, less expensive for business? What if that was part of the process of thinking through these ideas before they were enacted? We don't do that now. We worry about the species, rightfully so, but we're a species. Who worries about us? These mandates go in, and the consequences are much later. The intentions are always good. It always sounds great at the beginning, but you're in business, you know that very often unintended consequences cause problems for all of us. And we can change that if we agree in advance to consider economic impact. Why don't we do that? Why don't we consider economic impact and affordable energy? How much would that help businesses? How much would that help job creation? How much would this country be better off if we had a labor shortage and we had people competing, if everyone in this room was working to the full ability and desire that they have? What an untapped resource we all are. In this economy where people cannot get jobs that pay what they used to pay, they can get jobs, but they can't get good jobs. They can't get jobs with benefits. There's no competition for labor because there's too much labor and not enough jobs. And where are the jobs? They're going elsewhere. They're going to tax havens. They're going to cheap labor markets. We can't do something about all of that. We're certainly not going to have our wages competitive with China. That's not the plan. But we have to think about job creation, economic growth. That has to be a priority. I think we need new ideas. I think we need new people, new blood, fresh, new ways of looking at things. And I am an economic conservative, but a social moderate. I don't think the government belongs in your bedroom. I don't think the government should have control of your body. I think many things that are a state issue should be left a state issue, and the government should worry about sound currency and job creation and making sure that the economy functions the way the economy in America always functioned, which is to say, booming. We should be booming. And I look forward to answering your questions, and I thank you very much for listening.
Hello, I'm Brad Sherman from America's best named city, Sherman Oaks. It is a pleasure to be with you again. I've been involved in all of the chambers that have come together. Nora, thanks for putting this group together. And thank you, the Royal Park, West Hills Chamber of Commerce, the Woodland Hills Tarzana Chamber of Commerce, the Canoga Park Porter Ranch Chamber of Commerce, and the Encino Chamber of Commerce. I met someone who's new to the valley, and they said, "Yeah, Sherman, I see you around the last few weeks. It must be because you've got some big race. I read that you got a big race, and that's why you're around." Talk to anybody who's been in the West Valley for the last 15 years. I haven't had a race that anybody can remember the name of my last opponent, or the opponent before that, or the opponent before that. But everyone knows how accessible I am. There isn't a single chamber here where I haven't participated in 1 or 2 or 3 dozen events over the last few years. There isn't anybody who doesn't know that you can see Sherman at the free concerts in the park on Sunday. And that's not just for the few people that do come up and talk to me, but anybody who's willing to skip a song or two of the Beatles tribute band can come see a congressman, give them their ideas on what should be going on in Washington, or bring to my personal attention some pressing matter involving a federal agency. I should introduce my mother, who is here, Lynn Sherman. My mother lives in Porter Ranch, and I live in Sherman Oaks, and that means I know everything that's going on in the South Valley, the North Valley, the East Valley, and the West Valley. Also here with me is Michael Toe, who does my transportation land use planning work. A lot of you know that without Michael, we wouldn't have that additional lane on the 405 freeway. Now, I want to give you a little background about myself. I started my career as a CPA. And my friends came to me and said, Brad, you got to find an occupation held in lower public esteem. So I went to law school. 3 years of law school, 10 years of practice, got together with them again. They said, Brad, do you know what people think of lawyers? And I did. And they said, Brad, it's not low enough for you. They didn't think politics was low enough for me. But this state has the Board of Equalization, America's only elected tax commission. And in 1990, I became simultaneously a politician and a tax collector. My friends were convinced I'd reached the appropriate level. 6 years later, Tony Bielenson, who used to represent the West Valley, announced his retirement. Democrats said, how are we going to hold on to this seat? At the time, it was a swing seat. It could go Democrat or Republican. Being Democrats, they united behind a tax collector. And that was the key to my success, because only as a tax collector could I be elected using the slogan, send Brad to Washington or he may come visit you. Been in Congress since 1997, serve on the Financial Services Committee and on the Foreign Affairs Committee. What else do I need to cover here? Somebody's got their phone on? Oh, that's the, thank you for protecting us here.
They're not looking for you, it's okay.
Okay. Now, people see me here in the Valley. They know how accessible I am. They know I have town halls, listen to people, and I take Valley values back to Washington. So the other side has tried to turn that and say, well, if you see Sherman here, it must be that he's not in Washington. I want to assure you, I've got the best attendance record in Washington of any member of Congress from Southern California, from all of California. And in terms of effectiveness, let me go through the list. Not only did I work well with the rest of the delegation from the San Fernando Valley in Southern California to get and our senators to get some federal money for the 405 freeway, but I was the one member of our delegation who flew to Sacramento and get the lion's share, the $600 million that was necessary to build that additional lane on the 405 freeway. When it comes to the economy of the Valley, there's no one thing that's more important than home values. So many of us have our life savings, now diminished, tied up in home values. And it affects the entire community. Even if you're not buying a home, even if you're not selling a home. If you hear that the home 3 blocks away had to drop, it didn't get any offers, had to drop its price by $50,000, you're not taking your spouse out to dinner anywhere that doesn't have golden arches in front of you. We need to prevent a second precipitous decline in home values. That's why I led the effort to stop new regulations which would have said, no matter how good a family's credit is, they can't get a mortgage without a 20% down payment. If that had been instituted as it was proposed last year, that would have taken half the buyers out of the Valley, left all the sellers in the Valley, prices drop with supply and demand. And what does that do for the entire economy of the Valley? Not just those who are buying and selling or refinancing, but everyone. The LA Times is right. They've identified the 2 big issues between myself and my colleague. The biggest of those is TARP, the $700 billion bailout of Wall Street. I oppose that, and according to the Washington Post and according to the LA Times, I led the fight against that bailout. We blocked it the first time, and we forced changes in the program that were just decisive. You see, TARP stands for Toxic Asset Recovery Program. They dressed it up and tried to call it troubled asset, but it's toxic asset. What was the idea? The big banks had these toxic assets, the really bad subprime mortgages, and they wanted to recover the money they had invested. So they came down to Washington and said, the Treasury should buy the toxic assets from them, our cash for their trash. When we finished, the TARP program eventually did not buy a single toxic asset. Not one of those bad mortgages was sold for cash to the U.S. Treasury. Instead, the Treasury bought preferred stock. Not everybody here has an MBA, but just ask an 11-year-old kid. What's a better investment? Toxic asset, preferred stock. That's why we're getting the lion's share of our money back. Since 1998, I've led the effort to try to impose sanctions on the Iranian government and to stop its nuclear program. But I want to go back to the second issue that the LA Times identified, and that was NAFTA and MFN for China and these various trade deals. These trade deals are not structured in a way to achieve more exports than imports for the United States. We have the largest trade deficit in the history of life on this planet. If we had balanced trade, we would have an enormous labor shortage in the United States. And as Shelley explained how critical it is that we should have more good jobs than we have people seeking those jobs. The reason is that these trade deals assume that if another country changes its published statutes, that they're really going to let our imports in. No, they change their written statutes, and then they use their non-judicial and extrajudicial ways to keep our exports out. That's why these trade deals have been a failure for America, and that's why I want to change our international trading system. The LA Times identified those as the two issues between us, and they're right. And that's why I believe we've got to change our trade policy, and that's why I led the effort against the TARP bailout. I was part of the budget committee when we put together the last good bipartisan surplus budget for the United States. Unfortunately, that was back in 1998, where we included the Sherman Amendment, which provided $700 million to acquire over a period of time critical land for our national parks, including tens of millions of dollars for the Santa Monica Mountains. I'm responsible for improvements in the Sepulveda Basin, and I think I'm running a bit out of time here, so let me say that we both have a lot of endorsements. I'm proud to have the support of President Bill Clinton. I'm proud to have the support of every elected official who lives in the district, excluding the one who worked for Howard for 15 years. And I'm proud to have the support of the only elected official in the Valley who's a Republican, Mitch Englander, and the only elected official in the Valley who's an independent, Dennis Zine. But I'm particularly proud to have the support of over 350 business leaders, officers of chambers of commerce, former presidents of chambers of commerce from around the San Fernando Valley, particularly the West Valley and the South Valley, because this district is a West and South Valley district. If you want to see the list or anything else about what I'm talking about, go to bradsherman.com. You'll see my positions on the issues. You'll see those who have endorsed my candidacy. Speaking of endorsements, I have the endorsement of ALADS and Scale and well over 30,000 frontline officers who protect us every day. But the rest of the endorsements are on the list. Let me just end quickly. I've talked about how important it is that we maintain home values. I fought for a higher conforming loan limit so that the Fannie Mae will finance a home in high-cost areas like the Valley up to $625, and FHA insurance is available up to $729. And without that, we wouldn't be able to sell the homes south of the boulevard, and that would and we'd see precipitous decline of home values. But it's also up to us to maintain home values in communities by beautifying our home. And the one thing you can do most to beautify your home is to put up a Brad Sherman for Congress sign. Please take home one of these signs. I look forward to representing you for as long as you'll have me represent you in Congress. Thank you very much.